Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here with you guys this evening and to be on such a distinguished panel with people that I worked with during those 18 days. I apologize, my voice is a little hoarse. I'm getting used to this cold London weather. It's not good for somebody who just came from Egypt, so I apologize in advance. It's also very dangerous to ask a television reporter to be the last person to speak on a panel because we could be here for a while, but I will make my comments just very brief, but actually before, if you guys can indulge me with one really quick exercise, could I just ask how many people here think what happened in Egypt was a coup, and how many people here think it was a revolution? If you think it was a coup, could you just raise your hand? Thanks. And who thinks it was a revolution? Okay, so a few people here that think it was a revolution. Just good to know.
Because we're not invited, we come by chance, you know? If you invite the people think it's a revolution, it will be much more. But we are not invited. We just write our name outside. We know it by chance.
Thank you. I wonder why. Well, maybe that's something the organizers.
Yeah, if you want to make something like that, you should invite both sides to know. No, there is.
Well, I mean, hopefully, I'm not done talking yet.
You should do something like that.
Thanks,
to know that if you want to be fair, you should show both sides, not only one side. Otherwise, all what you're doing, it will be bullshit. Yeah.
Madam, you are invited very warmly. It's a public meeting. And
I come to watch the ridiculous things you are doing. I'm not invited.
You are very warmly invited. There's going to be lots of Q&A afterwards. And now I'd like Ayman to resume.
There's no balance in the discussion, Mr. Speaker of Board.
Guys, thank you very much for participating in that quick exercise, but I think really the point of why I just asked everyone to do that really quickly, even though it may not seem that it's balanced in the room for whatever reason, we can discuss that later. But the purpose of that was really just to give you a sense of how divided and how emotional the situation is in Egypt, even away from Egypt. Obviously, a lot of us here are Egyptians by virtue of descent or by actually being born there or being fully Egyptian, whatever, but emotions run high. And the reason why that's important is you get a sense of why the narrative in Egypt is very difficult in the way the media is covering it, and more importantly, the way international governments and others are responding to it. I'm not going to dwell too much on whether or not it's a coup or revolution. I just call it a coup-volution, and hopefully that's something that satisfies everybody in this room so nobody gets upset with me afterwards. And certainly, above all, like some of the companies that are represented media-wise and what have you. I think when we talk about the international response, it's not a uniform, single, coherent response. I think you have to make a distinction between governments, international media organizations, and international human rights organizations. All of those have had a very important component in the international narrative that is coming out of Egypt. I'm not even going to talk about the Egyptian media. I mean, I personally don't have much respect for it as an individual. In a country of 80 million, the Egyptian media was reporting 100 million went to the streets to participate in the June 30th protests. So that's a moot point. So let's not even waste a lot of time on talking about that. And I think my colleagues up here totally hit the nail on the head by saying how the media played a role. But international media has been very different. I think if you look at most of the major international news organizations, those that are respected, particularly here in the West, in the US and Europe, most of them have not been holding their punches about what is happening inside Egypt over the last several months. They have been very straightforward in calling it a coup. They are not accepting the narrative, or at least challenging the narrative, that what is unfolding in Egypt is a war on terror, as is put on the screens every day. That's not to say there are not terrorist acts taking place, but the simple narrative of what is being painted by the Egyptian government and its media is not as accepted and is not going without rigorous editorial challenges on a daily basis. For the most part, the international media is, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think they are challenging that narrative, the Egyptian government's narrative. We know just from the reaction of the Egyptian government, they have been very displeased with a lot of the media coverage that has come out from a lot of the international media. And it's troubling because we are now starting to see some of those restrictions on foreign reporters. And I've had the privilege of working in Egypt representing Al Jazeera, but also now working for an American company, and I can see firsthand the type of restrictions that are taking us back and not forward. When we talk about some of the reactions from international organizations, I think that for the most part, the ones that, again, very much respected, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, several other human rights organizations, regionally and internationally, again, have been very critical, have been very aggressive in documenting what is happening in Egypt, the violations in all levels of Egyptian governance, whether it's the judiciary process, whether it's freedom of expression. All of these things are being documented. The evidence is out there that the situation in Egypt right now is not moving in a direction that is viewed by most people as positive. Now, the third and final grouping of international players, if you will, that I wanted to talk about really has to do with foreign governments. And here is perhaps the most important, as we heard Dr. Azam mention, here in the UK government has been, much to the chagrin of a lot of people, been somewhat silent. But again, when we talk about the international community, you have to distinguish between regional countries, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, European countries, Germany, France, the UK, and perhaps in the case of Egypt, most importantly, whether that's good or bad, is the United States. The United States, throughout the term of President Mohamed Morsi, came under a tremendous amount of criticism that it had aligned itself so quickly with the Muslim Brotherhood, that it in fact had started to deal with them, that the presidency of Mohamed Morsi was in the best interest of the United States. And so in fact they were among the quickest to lend the type of legitimacy that could be perceived as being very close to the office of President Mohamed Morsi. And shortly after the incidents of June 30th and July 3rd, and subsequently the crackdown in Rabaa and elsewhere, the United States government became more distant from their criticism. They become more silent. And just a few weeks ago, Secretary of State John Kerry, perhaps in what many have described as one of the most stark reversals, came out and said that the presidency of Mohamed Morsi had actually stolen the revolution, the January 25th revolution, from the youth who had fought it. In essence, the United States has recalibrated its foreign policy to once again align with the realities on the ground. Now, for us, a lot of people sometimes really struggle with why